one of the most respected employers in India. As CFO, he led Dr. Reddy's ADR listing on NYSE and formulation of active treasury and M&A strategies. He has also won several awards, including the best CFO in the large enterprise healthy balance sheet management category at the Business World S-Bank, best CFO awards in 2016, and CNBC's TV18's best performing CFO in the healthcare sector award in 2007. Among others, he holds a PhD from ISB Hyderabad and an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. Very glad to have you, Dr. Saumen, and request you to take it over from here. Lead the discussion.
Thank you, Kiran, and welcome all the participants. It's a very interesting topic. I had the privilege of serving Dr. Reddy's for 2 decades now. Dr. Reddy's started the sustainability report way back in 2004, when a lot of people didn't used to speak that much about sustainability. Last couple of years, ESG has become a norm, and all the investor relation discussion, there is a lot of focus. But I remember, because we had a large number of FIIs, a few of the FIIs were very keen to discuss, instead of a quarterly result and what is going to come. I mean, I can name even one, like First State was one of the largest investors. I always used to enjoy discussion with them because they used to focus a lot on multiple areas, including leadership, performance management, succession planning, safety, quality, everything, and much lesser focus on the financial results per se. And we learned throughout these 2 decades how critical are each one of them. Actually, any single problem in safety or even in quality can really derail an organization. Now, there are a lot of things which are happening in this area now that include reduction of carbon footprint, energy management, effluent discharge, waste management, even plastic waste circularity. So lots of things are there. But as Kiran said, we are fortunate to have a set of very prominent speakers who are from this industry. So first, let me introduce this speaker one by one, starting with Dr. Anand. Dr. Anand is the founder and CEO of Govin Holdings Singapore, which is headquartered in Singapore with a focus on pharma logistics, pharma bioadvisory, startup entrepreneurship, and strategic investment. He has 20 years of active investment management experience in healthcare, life science, and technology. In addition, he is also the founding partner of Govin Capital, an early stage investment firm with a focus in digital health and EdTech. Now, he led more than 65 investments with 20 successful exits, including 2 unicorn exits in biotech and pharma. Now, during the recent COVID-19 crisis, he stepped up efforts to supply PPEs and complex ICU drugs for patient management, both in Singapore and in India. Now, prior to Govin, he has also worked in Ester and Temasek in Singapore. Now, he is an advisor to many leading organizations and foundations involved in healthcare and digital technology. He's a thought leader in biomedical space, and he serves on many industry bodies. Now, he is a recipient of Asia Pacific Innovative and Educational Leadership Award 2019 and Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Award for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, among many other awards. So welcome, Dr. Anand, to this panel of speakers. Next is Mr. Gubba Kiran. Now, he is the CEO of Gubba Cold Storage. So he virtually became the face of Gubba to the seed and pharma industries. Now, setting up India's first private sector dehumidified cold storage for seeds way back in 1998, now has been his brainchild. Now, his core competency in finance has fueled the company in setting up 70 cold storage plants, 0.7 million cubic feet to one of India's biggest cold storage companies with 13 million cubic feet. So again, welcome Mr. Gubba Kiran to the speakers panel. And next is Dr. Mahesh Balghat. Dr. Mahesh holds a PhD in medicinal chemistry from the University of Utah. He has 30 years of experience in the biopharmaceutical, vaccine, and pharma industries. During a 20-year US stint, he worked with Amgen, Monsanto, Celera Genomics, and Molecular Probes, now Thermo Fisher. After moving to India, Mahesh was part of the team that brought WHO pre-qualification approvals for 4 vaccines in biological levels. Just before joining Syngene, he was the Chief Operating Officer at Shanta Biotechnics, a Sanofi company. Mahesh is a member of the CIA National Committee on Technology, R&D, and Innovation. At Syngene, Mahesh is the Chief Operating Officer and a member of the Executive Committee. Welcome, Dr. Mahesh, to this panel of speakers. So I will tell the audience the format of the session. It will be very conversational. So none of the speaker will make any PowerPoint presentations. So I will encourage the audience to put their questions in the chat box. If it is addressed to a specific speaker, he will respond. Otherwise, I will pick up one among them to respond to your specific questions. Of course, to start with, I will lead the conversation with a few questions individually to each one of them and some questions to all of them. So my first question to each of these speakers would be to talk about, what does sustainability mean to you and what specific aspects of sustainability appeals to you most? So maybe we can go in the same order, starting with Dr. Anand.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And it's a pleasure to be at the Thai Sustainability Summit, representing all my fellow colleagues and investor members from Singapore. Sustainability to me is a very important word, especially in the context of healthcare. It is becoming extremely important because sustainability need not just have a social impact, but it also has diverse financial impact, economic impact, and also, I would say, psychological impact. And of course, we all are talking about climate change, and climate change has become extremely important. In the context of digital healthcare and healthcare, the future of sustainability is actually very much dependent on the way healthcare is going to evolve. And post-pandemic, it has become extremely important for healthcare to have novel sustainable approaches. For me, sustainability in healthcare is one of the most important topics that needs to be addressed. And for that to happen, it is important that there has to be not just a policy change, but also a behavioral change. And let me basically cite an example. When we go to a hospital and take a report, have you ever measured what is the weight of the report, the paper report that you get from a doctor? In fact, inpatient report weighs about 600 over grams, and an outpatient report weighs around 320 grams. Now, with advent of electronic health records and telemedicine, the impact of sustainability is so much that if you're able to replace the paper reports with electronic health records, it actually tantamounts to a reduction of carbon gases, carbon dioxide, to a potential of about 21,000 tons of carbon dioxide. This is according to a report by Kaiser Permanente, a prominent US healthcare organization, and which represents the amount of carbon sequestered by over 4,000 acres of pine forest. The impact is huge. And especially with just one simple example of replacing paper records with that of electronic health records. There are a few other examples which I will basically showcase as we go along. But one of the most important, I would say, impact of COVID-19 has been the amount of overload that healthcare infrastructure has had in India and abroad, and probably even globally. So there is a huge impact on healthcare infrastructure. The number of visits by patients and by people just during COVID-19 has surpassed all means of healthcare infrastructure within any logical means. And hence, if you want to decrease, that's where you have to use digital health technologies such as telemedicine. Now, the impact of telemedicine on sustainability is so huge that if we were readily prepared for an emergency response management using telemedicine, it would have actually reduced the impact by almost about 30%. Again, according to a report by Kaiser that is published in the US. So with that, I will pause. And I think sustainability has got a huge impact in healthcare going forward. And I'll cite a few more examples as to how sustainability and green hospitals are going to converge the future of healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anand. So, Mr. Gubba.
Yeah, there's an old saying, like, I mean, a good car with a bad driver is a bad scenario. Especially after the COVID scenario, like, I mean, especially the world is now looking at investments in healthcare, especially in India. All the more, it is more in India. Like the Fortune 500 companies, I keep saying to sustain what you call the pharma business, to sustain the pharma business, the allied industry also need to grow hand in glove with the pharma industry. What does the Fortune 500 companies teach us? To stick to your core competency. If you look at in West, most of the cold chain industry is organized, and unlike West, in India, 90% of the cold chain industry is unorganized. But there's a good and a bad again in India. A good part, we have got lots of cold storage facilities across East, West, North, and South, even in small villages, but most of them go into fruits and vegetables. Pharma, less than 10% are pharma compliant facilities, but we can make those facilities a pharma compliant, whether it's a WHO GDP or a HACCP certified and so on. I keep saying to the pharma industry that you stick to your core competency. We, the pharma cold chain industry or the cold storage industry or the warehousing industry, we will be like the air under your wings. We keep talking about savings of fruits and vegetables and so on. And that's how the government in India at least giving a thirst to fruits and vegetables, which is a good thing. But even healthcare also comes under critical subject, not just fruits and vegetables alone. Now, there are some SOPs given to the cold storage industry for food and pharma, but food and vegetables, but not to pharma. Time has come for the pharma, for the government to give SOPs, whether it's a capital subsidy, whether interest subsidy, whether the electricity subsidy, or some subsidies, because the government is also giving capital incentives like the PLI scheme or the Atmanirbhar Bharat to set up pharma, what you call companies. So even warehousing, cold storage, cold chain for pharma is also critical. So the thirst of the government should be more. In fact, when you set up facilities which are pharma compliant to the pharma industry, there's a lot of savings. There's a lot of energy cost savings, manpower cost savings, capital goods savings. So if I keep talking like that, I can go for an hour. What actually means for the cold chain industry to give that sustainable future and solutions to the pharma industry.
Great.
Both go hand in glove.
Thank you, Mr. Gubba. So over to you, Dr. Mahesh.
Thank you. First of all, thanks to TIE for having such an important topic that they are putting together a specific panel on the pharma related opportunities. And I think, both of my co-panelists, Dr. Anand and Gubba, have set up the stage to say, really, what are the opportunities? But I'll take a step back a little bit more and make sure that we define this topic as broadly as we can, so that the opportunities that Gubba was just talking about are really perceived in its entirety, right? So if we look at, and I literally started the basics. Sustainability, as per the Webster's definition, is actually about, it's very plain and simple. It just says of relating to or being a method of harvesting or using a resource. so that the resource is not depleted or permanently damaged. Let's face it, we've moved away from that definition now, because today sustainability is about E, S, and G. It's not just about E, it's not just about S, or not just about G. And in each of these, which has now become a corporate sustainability yardstick, there is an opportunity that is there, thanks even more so in part to the pandemic. While this was not a brand new word, but ESG accountability has completely changed in the pandemic framework, and putting many industries on the front page of this particular topic, including pharma. So clearly there's an opportunity there. Why is it gaining so much momentum? Well, let's think about it. If 9 out of 10 people you ask, do you want to invest in a way that leaves a positive mark behind? They obviously say yes. And that's why there's $1 billion worth of investment that is happening. In fact, last year, to just quote some numbers from Morningstar, right? 51 billion was new investor money that poured into ESG related funds. And this was breaking the record for a 5th consecutive year. That's the rate at which ESG is getting funded. And that's actually more than doubling the 21 billion that was invested in 2019. It tells you that people are passionate about this topic and the opportunity is there. I want to bring it home a little bit even closer to India, right? When we look at the 6th edition of the Sustainable Development Report 2021, which just came out a few months back, India was ranked at a score of 60.1, placed at a rank of 120th out of 165 countries. Finland, Denmark, Sweden are the top 3, and they are at a rank of about 85 on a scale of 100. What this means is that we have a ways to go, and the components that we will need to work on are the following, right? It's one, of course, the right level of policies and sustainability efforts coming from the government. It's going to be in parallel effort that is coming from the industry. But along with that, it's going to be a holistic mindset change that we're going to need to do. And that's where I think looking at alternates to what we are doing, not just from a pure cost perspective, but from a sustainability perspective, is what's going to make the difference. And I'm going to give some examples later on. Hopefully we'll have the opportunity to talk about things like green chemistry, things like looking at knowledge sharing approaches, looking at our transitions that all companies are doing, bringing in more electronic ways of working, and how that can all contribute towards sustainability and improved, not just, again, the E part of it, but the S and G part of it as well. I'll stop there and look for more interaction and topics that we can converse around all of this.
Thank you, Dr. Mahesh. So you really spoke about India as a long way to go. But my first question is to Dr. Anand, and you have spent a lot of time in Singapore. And even though it didn't come in top 3, but it is one of the leading nation in adopting the sustainability practice. So can you please share your insights about the Singapore adoption of sustainable practices?
This has been about 25 years for me in Singapore. And what I've realized is that Singapore is actually a role model for livable and sustainable living. It is one of the most green, I would say, garden cities or a garden nation. Why do I say that? It's because 70% of the land area is actually covered, is green, and it's continuing. You have more and more within a distance of about few kilometers, you have every building connected to a park. So sustainability in Singapore is not just about green spaces or green environment. It's also about green energy. It's about also about how you invest in resources, invest in people, and for the betterment and for the betterment and the future of this particular country. Singapore was born without any resources. We didn't have any resources about 35 years back. And so we had to basically carefully identify natural resources and use natural gas for 95% of our electricity, so that we can basically build a very clean and a green city and attract investments, foreign direct investments into the nation. That was one strategy that the nation had adopted by the forefathers who built Singapore. No wonder Singapore is actually one of the 20 most carbon efficient nations as we speak today. And it is also one of the most sustainable cities, especially in Asia, ranked number 4 globally, according to the 2018 Sustainable Cities Index. Organizations, investment organizations, like one of my organizations where I worked, Temasek, along with few other very prominent investment organizations that are headquartered in Singapore, including World Bank, IFCs, and others. They have actually now looking at investments, not just from a financial analysis, not just from an IRR analysis, but also from an ESG analysis. So the conscious adoption of ESG principles along with financial principles have become now the new norm. And this conscious behavioral change or the conscious mindset change amongst leaders is now what is getting percolated across everyone here in Singapore, at least in the financial community. There is also in 2019 a carbon tax that was implemented. And this carbon tax, basically, Singapore became the first country in Southeast Asia to introduce a carbon price. And this carbon tax was at 5 Singapore dollars per ton of greenhouse gas emissions. This is basically to discourage facilities, companies from making the carbon dioxide overload in the environment. And so it's monitored quite systematically and significantly every year by the government, by the ministries, so as to ensure that Singapore is actually one of the most environmental conscious nations, cooperating with the Paris Agreement and also cooperating with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 development goals that actually the UN has put. This is what I wanted to basically share. But most importantly, in the healthcare scenario, let me just give you an example of how hospitals are actually becoming more green. So the future is all about green hospitals. And what I mean by is that not just in terms of not just in terms of the architecture, but also the design, so that you can have better patient recovery going forward. And that's why there's a hospital here by name Kutek Port, which has received several awards, especially in a green hospital or the green future that it is posing towards. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So my next question is to Mr. Gubba Kiran. Now, you know that scope 3 emission, it is actually that could be optimized across the value chain. And since you really put it across the supply chain, so how do you really ensure that? What kind of challenges did you face? And what has been your insights in the waste management?
Yeah, so as I said, to set up, it's not just a what you call the energy wastage. There is a manpower wastage, there's an energy wastage, there's a resource wastage, there's a money wastage, and whatnot. Now, at least for now. Now, जब आपको 5 लीटर की दूध जरूरत है, तो आप भैंस मत खरीदो, सिर्फ 5 लीटर दूध खरीदो. When you want 5 liters of milk every day, buy 5 liters, not the buffalo. Now, because that makes sense in today's world, in the 21st century, and especially when there's so much of growth in the industry. If a pharma company wants to set up a facility of say 5,000 pallets, right? They would set up, and probably they end up using that facility at full optimum maybe 5 years down the line. So year on year there would be increase in the volume, but maybe at the 5th year the 100% volume of capacity is achieved, and that's how, because that's how the future thinking is all about it. So the next 4 years there will be a resource wastage, the finance wastage, the manpower wastage, the energy wastage, and so on. In a third-party culture, what we do in India, especially the food sector, today, I can say 80% of the industry, even in organized, is hire and fire. Go to the third party and hire it and fire it. That's where you stick to your core competency, like the West. So it makes sense in those circumstances to hire a third party, scale as it grows, such that you actually save to your bottom line and save the various ongoing recurring costs, such that you stick to your core competency in bringing out the best medicine to save the mankind. The allied industry will stick to our core competency in giving you the best services, whether it's lean management, whether it's Six Sigma, whether it's ERP integration, whether it is artificial intelligence, we'll go full throttle because that's our bread and butter. We will not focus on your invention of your drug. We will focus on the allied such that it will save on your what you call sustainability. Yep. You are on mute, Mr. Saumen.
Great, thank you. So, Dr. Mahesh, you already spoke about green chemistry. Now, not only green chemistry, even quality by design have been spoken about for quite some time as the right tools for sustainable practice. Now, could you please share your own experience with implementing both these tools in your organizations, wherever you have worked?
Yeah, so let me just talk a little bit about my organization since I didn't really introduce Syngene before. So Syngene is a global CRO and a CDMO, which means we are involved in the business of supporting pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, healthcare companies of other kinds, plus other related sort of veterinary crop industry companies to come up with their needs and support them with discovery, development, manufacturing, right? So we cover the end-to-end gamut of everything to do with pharma, biotech, and related industries. And in that, I think the opportunity that we have is to look at the different components of where we can bring in efficiency, and whether that efficiency is from a pure productivity perspective or whether that efficiency is from a green or environmental components of it, if you will. Let me just sort of give some examples of the kinds of things that we are doing. One is with regards to use of data and electronic approaches to data processing and analytics. We now have tools that we've introduced with our clients where typically in a drug discovery process, you make thousands of compounds, you screen them against many different assays, and then you look for that one needle in a haystack that has the right activity for you against the disease target that you're going after. We've now reduced that process by doing data analysis and coming up with algorithms so that the thousands of compounds that you needed to actually synthesize and spend a lot of time, spend a lot of energy, use a lot of chemicals to make those can now be further reduced because you can weed out a lot of those compounds just by the AI ML algorithms that you put them through. So that's a way by which we are bringing efficiency into the system. One, taking it truly in a quality by design approach to say which functional groups, which components of that entity are really essential, which we have now mined through the data from other compounds or other screens, and then implement that for the future synthesis and future narrow down. That's sort of an example of how we are using data and electronic approaches. Let me give another example, which is about literally on a much more tactical way. We're also documenting things, the age-old days of documenting things that used to be in a paper notebook where you had lots of sheets of paper that you would generate when you went through one experiment. We've now turned all of that into electronic lab notebooks. One, of course, it helps from a ease of searching and finding that information, but it also reduces the same carbon footprint that Dr. Anand referred to at the very beginning, right? These are solutions around how we are able to make day-to-day implementation and also strategic differences in how we contribute to the ESG components of the pharma industry. Let me give one more example, which is even more tactical and practical in how things are done in the lab. Traditionally, many years back when we were all in the lab doing our own work, we would have things like an oil bath to heat up things. We've moved from, we don't want to use oil. We want to get into a better way of managing that, both from a safety perspective and from a environmental perspective. And we've gone to now what are called as bead baths. They are much more renewable. In our own chemistry labs, frankly, we've actually reduced our carbon footprint because of these kinds of changes from 12.7 tons to about less than 5 tons. And that's the kind of difference that we're able to bring in. One, to use data to make it much more data centric and bring in all of the components of QBD, quality by design at the very beginning, and then bring in much more practical solutions of how we manage the day-to-day environment in the laboratory. I'll stop with those examples.
Great, Dr. Mahesh. I like you speaking about getting that one needle in the haystack. So maybe Dr. Anand, you can elaborate that further in terms of your experience in digital and the entire technology aspects. So you have already given some example of a green hospital, but could you give some more where people can work and make a huge difference in sustainability?
I'm going to take some time to give some examples in the biotech industry, pharma, as well as in the digital health industry. And not everything is hunky-dory, by the way. There are some loopholes that I'm going to address shortly. In the biotech industry, basically sustainability, in fact, if you do the typical drug development process, people will understand, scientists, you have to spend a lot of time doing preclinical studies. And before you can go into the clinical studies. In the preclinical studies, there is heavy usage or heavy reliance on the data coming from animals. And most of the times you have to work on rats, on mice, on rabbits, and even dogs, such as large animals, such as dogs. Now, gone are those days. In fact, actually, I sit on the project advisory committee for the University of Hyderabad, and I'm aware of two startups that one of them is ex-Dr. Reddy's, by the way, who started this company, who have developed non-animal model. It's a non-animal model for screening of drugs and screening of compounds, where you can test in vitro as well as in vivo without killing animals. Now, that to me is a sustainable revolution that is happening in the biotech industry. Let me just now move on to in the pharma industry. In the pharma industry, in fact, sustainable approaches to me is one of the biggest areas is waste management. So the waste management, you need to have a proper waste management resources, not just to protect the environment, but also within the hospital. How do you basically have a closed loop system to collect waste on a real-time basis and to dispose it off on a real-time basis? And that too in reusable plastics or in plastics, which are basically much more biodegradable and environmental friendly. So the hospital waste management system plays a very important role in contributing to the sustainability initiatives that all of us are. And recently now there is a photograph that has become extremely popular. It is a photograph of a seahorse, which basically is carrying a face mask within the deep oceans in northern Greece. That goes to show that if we do not take care of the waste management, there will be a lot of impact that not just oceans, but all of us will be facing. And in the digital health industry, while we are talking about digitalization as the core impact or the core initiative for COVID-19, post-COVID-19, and obviously for digital health, you need to have data centers. But then with data centers, the challenge is you also consume a lot of energy. There is a lot of energy utilization. So in Singapore, what is happening is that now there is a reduction in the number of data centers. There is again a conscious attempt that is being made to reduce the number of data centers and to go towards more cloud-based or to go towards storage of information where you don't have to use a lot of energy. So the whole ICT industry, the medtech industry, which relies or thrives on basically digitalization, not only just has got a social impact, but also a huge financial impact. And let me just share a number. Post all these negative impact from the energy that is emitted from a data center, still by using digitalization and IT resources in the healthcare industry, it is shown that the amount of carbon dioxide or the amount of gases, greenhouse gases that are emitted is much, much lesser, and it is playing a very important role. And hence, it is extremely important for us to think about sustainable approaches in digital health, pharmaceutical, and in the biotech industry.
Thank you.
If I may just add a little bit more to what Dr. Anand mentioned, because I think it's a perfect link of exactly what I was talking about, right? On one hand, we are coming up with ways by which we reduce the number of compounds that you need to synthesize to get to a good candidate. Of course, from that, it has all kinds of downstream impacts. And I think Dr. Anand has very eloquently called it out, saying, Well, now therefore you have to test less in animals. I think the further extension, and I think you were also referring to that, the further extension of that is those tests that we are also doing now are actually being done with synthetic, if you will, models, right? So we have, a lung model that doesn't come from having to sacrifice an animal, but it actually comes from an artificial lung. Or we have a skin model that is actually a 3D skin model that's generated in the lab. Again, leading in a very big way to the whole sustainability effort by reducing time, reducing money, and then of course also in this case, when you talk about that, the impact to the lives of the animals that have to be sacrificed otherwise when you go through a proper drug discovery and development process. I think there's one other component that I sort of want to bring up that, and this is because we are talking pharma, biotech, I think the audience will appreciate. We've actually taken this much farther because the power of data is something that we really have to realize. We've taken this into the biotech world today has a lot of molecules that are in the pipeline that are called monoclonal antibodies. We've now developed algorithms by which you can predict the glycosylation pattern of your antibody based on the conditions under which you grow it, right? Again, reducing the number of steps, reducing the number of runs that you would have to do of really expensive, time-consuming steps, plus media, which is generating a lot of biomass and a lot of bio-waste. That is now avoided. Of course, I think the point that Dr. Gubba was making earlier. There's a lot of other related industries that get impacted, and we have to recognize that when you're talking sustainability, it's not just about your own ecosystem, your own company, but it's your entire ecosystem. And the example there is about where you actually look at how are you going to dispose the biomass that is coming from a biotech industry? And is that getting through the right channels so that you are not actually polluting and you're not actually impacting the carbon footprint? In our case, of course, things like going into the cement industry. So I think it's a very good opportunity to look at how the whole industry sort of connects and brings in all of the other peripheral opportunities, whether it's technology driven or whether it's peripherally driven.
Thank you.
To add Dr. Mahesh's point, artificial intelligence is going to be a breakthrough, and it's already proving that, because not just in terms of economic impact, but also in terms of skills development and job creation. So sustainability to me is also about adding value to human resources, investing in the right skill sets for the biotech industry, pharma industry, and the healthcare industry.
Great, thank you. So my next question will be for Mr. Gubba. It's a little different from technology and all. It is all about how can you expect, what do you really expect the government to do? How can government really promote ESG practices? What kind of incentives or even deterrents they can put in place?
Yeah, as I said, like roti, kapda or makan. Our government, basically India is a developing country. So all these years, government has been spending its time, resources, energy, subsidies, anything for the fruits and vegetables, especially. And of course, the grains and other products too. Now, slowly, it's now moving. So now we are coming out into frozen food. In the last 10 years or so, or a decade or so, we started eating the frozen food, right? And then that's the future, right? Shayad bachpan mein, like today we have it's a French fries. We just buy it from the supermarket, then we deep fry it and eat it. 30 saal pehle ki baat hai. Like when I was eating French fries when I was young, mom used to cut and give it to us. We used to wipe it in a napkin and they will give it back to her. No, gone are those days, right? In the way industry is progressing, the time has come for the government to give a SOP and a view, a generous view even to the pharmaceutical cold chain industry, where there is upgradation of the infrastructure, upgradation of technology, like using artificial intelligence. It's not just setting up one beautiful warehouse. Now, if I don't connect it with my artificial intelligence, with my ERP system and structures to what's needed to the client, then it's like a car without a key. So let government come up with some packages, like, I mean, whether it's a reduction of GST to the capital goods equipments to set up a cold storage facility or a warehousing, and come out with some incentives, whether it is interest incentive or electricity incentive or upgradation incentives, such that more and more cold storages or warehouses or cold chain systems come up to commemorate the growth of the pharma industry, to commemorate the growth of the pharma industry. We being the air between the pharma industry, government looking us that integral part of the whole field.
Thank you.
Can I share some examples from Singapore?
Oh, sure, please.
I think in the context of Singapore is already setting up funds to develop sustainable solutions. They're encouraging startups, they're encouraging SMEs to come up with sustainable solutions in the healthcare, biotech, and in the pharma industry, and also in the ICT industry. And there is a Ministry of Sustainability and Environment that has recently announced the creation of a new fund. And it's as per the Singapore Sustainable Blueprint or the Green Plan that the Singapore government has come about with. So these kind of conscious changes have been put in place, at the same time penalizing those companies which are emitting gases beyond certain quantities, like say 125,000 tons per year or so. Then there are some penalties that they have to pay in form of carbon tax. These kind of conscious changes at the policy level, at the government level, supporting not just the big companies, but also the startups and the SMEs will play a long, I would say, beneficial role for creating a major impact.
Okay, I already see one audience question asking about, is there an example of a green hospital in India and how they are managing the biomedical waste? So any one of you would like to take that question?
So let me offer an example of green hospital is of course a hospital is a much bigger ecosystem, but let me offer an example of where we need to really think in the smallest steps that we can implement. And this goes back to also tying the question that and the issue that Mr. Gubba was addressing, which is what do we need as support from the government? I think there's always room for policy and government support, but the example I want to offer is here in Bangalore, and we support a setup called Ilaj clinics. So these are not hospitals, but these are clinics. E refers to electronic. What happens there is patient records are actually captured electronically, avoiding exactly what Dr. Anand started out with. And this is in the ruralist parts of Karnataka where such a setup can happen. Now imagine these folks, one, if you give them a piece of paper, it's probably not going to be saved that next time that they come around, they can know what their blood sugar was or what their blood pressure was. On the other hand, if it is electronically logged in somewhere, it's accessible. And then of course, it also helps build that kind of mindset of saying, my data is there, my record is there. So it's tying many of these things together, and those are the kinds of things that are happening in many different ways. Of course, we know many other hospitals have also now gone to electronic ways of record keeping. Waste management in hospitals has also been transforming. I don't have the time to go through specific examples, but in pockets we're starting to see this. I don't believe that there's an example of a fully green hospital like the kind Dr. Anand was referring to.
So my next set of questions, any one of you may like to answer, maybe all of you can also answer. How do you really integrate the ESG strategy to the company strategy? How sustainability would be part of the decision-making process? And do you think even the compensation of the top management can be linked to the sustainability improvement? So open question to any one of you or each one of you.
At least I can take a bet. In fact, actually, making a time, these are early stages, I would say, for understanding how to link ESG to performance of a particular organization or to performance of an individual. But I'm aware that there are now companies that have come up with ESG principles put in place, and which are basically measuring the triple bottom line. And investments in companies are actually going based on the triple bottom line. What it means is that essentially not just looking at the financial metric, but also on the ESG metrics of a particular investment company or an investee company. Now, this will take some time for you to see a catalytic change, but the change has begun. Why do I see this? I say this because essentially for any catalytic change, you need cooperation from all the companies, because climate change is not just about one part of the world. It is actually a global phenomenon. So for that global phenomena to have an impact, you need to have everybody, all the nations, to come forward. And it begins with individuals like you and me to start with consciously thinking about what kind of practices to be put in place for essentially linking ESG to performance and linking performance to compensation and to ESG.
Great. Yeah, Mr. Gubba.
Yeah, if you look at, like, I mean, say 50 pharma companies setting up 500 pallets of their own in-house warehouse or cold storage facility, that comes to around 25,000 pallets. Now, imagine, say, 10,000 worth pallets, a centralized warehouse offered as a solution in region-wise to these pharma companies. Imagine the governance which comes down. Imagine the impact on the top line. Imagine impact on the bottom line. Imagine your resources staying to your key core items. So it makes sense. It makes sense when the world, when the developed countries are adopting such cultures. Time has come for India also to adopt such cultures. India, yes, India were storing fruits and vegetables for the past 50 years, but now India in cold storage industry or warehousing industry is gearing up to serve what's needed to the world pharma industry.
Great.
Let me just add further to that, right? I think, obviously it's been said that ESG is a way to monitor management performance for sure, right? But within the pharma industry, I think it's going to take a leap of faith for us to recognize that there are so many opportunities, and I'll just call 2 or 3 of them out because which are outside of what we've talked about, which is primarily environmental, right? I mean, from a, are we doing the right thing from a safety of clinical trial participants, and how good is our monetary policy for any legal compensation around clinical trials? There's another debate that's going on around what are companies doing for counterfeit drug management. What is happening with regards to employee recruitment, development, retention, and what are the opportunities there? And when you start to think about each of these lines, there are metrics that management teams are now putting together and saying, have you moved the needle on each of these metrics? This is how we are measuring ourselves at. Then there's, of course, a practical component of what's happening on the ground immediately, whether we are going to more energy efficient pumps, very, very simple things, right? Are we going towards metered dosing facilities that actually will make sure that you only have the right amount of fuel consumption that's happening? I mean, we ourselves, for example, demonstrated that we are about 62 million kilowatts of energy savings last year from operational efficiency initiatives. And I think these are the kinds of things that are going to come in by which management teams are going to be measured as we move forward. Truly, from the way you moved on your environmental sustainability index, whether it is MSCI or any of the others, year on year, along with, of course, your top line and bottom line numbers that we are all used to looking at. And I think that's the transformation we will go through. There's one last bit that I want to bring up with regards to what Dr. Anand mentioned, because he mentioned something about plastics. And I think that's where we will also have the opportunity to do some out of the box thinking. We need to start thinking about plastic, which of course is used in pharma packaging quite heavily, to a concept of plastic credits, similar to what we've been talking about as carbon credits. And how do you get to a zero plastic environment by, I won't go into all the details around it, but these are ways by which you can actually trade on what you have been using as the one-time use plastic versus what you have been using as reusable plastic. And how do you compensate and bring in enough so that what you have utilized is actually paid back and you build to sustainability. So I think there's a number of elements of which we will see this evolving in, especially as I mentioned at the very beginning, India being at 120th has a huge opportunity to get to the top.
So
one of my I just want to add one point here. One of my businesses is into pharma supply chain. And last year I faced a very interesting situation. During a transshipment, and this could be of interest for Gubba, Kiran also, during transshipment, usually when you supply or when you carry cold chain medicines, so cold chain drugs, or for that matter, cold chain vaccines from one country to another country, you have to basically maintain the temperature. So to cut down cost, a lot of companies, especially in the emerging world, I won't name the country or the company, they use remote practices for very archaic methods like nitrogen packs. Whereas in the West, you already have envirotainers that basically may be a bit expensive, but are much more sustainable, environmental friendly. So to me, as a decision maker, I had to weigh the pros and cons of basically spending more money, but getting and adopting a sustainable approach, such as using envirotainers for the supply and for the of cold chain medicines, versus saving cost and improving my margins by not using an envirotainer. Because to hire an envirotainer from one country to another country, put it on a sea, on a ship, or on air cargo, especially, will be quite expensive. But eventually, we took a decision that, okay, to be in favorable with the environment and with the climate, I think we should go with envirotainers rather than basically going with the remote practices. So these type of decision making at the top will play an important role.
Since the time is short, because there are 2 more questions from the audience, I will just read out the 2 questions and maybe one of you can respond to that. One is about what are the measures taken to reduce the carbon footprint with Indian drug or API or intermediate manufacturers. Any one of you would like to take it?
Yeah, let me take that one, right? So and I can give with specific examples. There are many steps taken. In fact, we have a customer that we actually did this for, where they came to us with a synthesis that was 4 steps of synthesis. We've reduced that to a 2-step synthesis. What was taking them 7 batches to produce a target quantity, we've now reduced that to 2 batches from a target quantity. The other measure that we have is number of reactor days, because that has a consumption of energy. We reduce the reactor days from 26 to 17. All of these are ways by which we are making a difference in how API manufacturing also happens within the country. Last but not least, the whole approach around green chemistry of utilizing more biological based methods to get to certain transformations instead of purely synthetic methods is also something that we do. And these are things that we will start to see more and more of. One, of course, driven by policies. Second, also supported by technology, and then decisions made by companies that want to move in that direction.
We'll take one last question from the audience. That can we have a glimpse of grassroots level changes that are getting implemented in healthcare industry sustainable practices?
I didn't hear the first part. Can we have a?
Can we have a glimpse of grassroots level changes that are getting implemented in healthcare industry sustainable practices?
I can take that again. Yeah. From the allied industry. See, again, going back, 50 pharma companies setting up, say, 500 pallets each cold storage or warehousing facilities. You need 50 safety officers, QA officers, 50 data logging systems, renewables, 50 refrigeration systems, all 50. But if you centralize all that to one third party, you need one each of all. Chota, it's a very small practice, but it's an impactful grassroots level, what you call bottom line, realistic, advantageous approach.
Thank you. So before I hand over to Kiran, let me quickly summarize, because it has been a very good, some very good points have been made by each one of you. Anand started with, behavioral changes and how reducing carbon footprint can be done, giving example of Singapore model where carbon tax has been imposed. He spoke about even reducing, data centers and making more cloud-based kind of thing. He spoke about moving away from animal-based to non-animal model in terms of, clinical. And Mr. Gubba really talked about reducing waste in every area. And how can you really use, basically focus on core competence, but use the ecosystem, use the value supply chain partners, to really deliver for overall companies as a whole, across the industry, and really take advantage of the third party with their, basically the metaphor he put that instead of, if you want 5 liters of milk, go for it rather than buying a buffalo. What Dr. Mahesh really talked about is actually electronic lab notebook, actually having a lot of things in R&D in line with clean chemistry and QBD. Really, his metaphor about finding that one needle in the haystack, and even putting some kind of a anti-counterfeit measures and some of the metrics for the management. So I really felt it was very rich discussion, but everything has to come to an end. So I hand over to Kiran to give a vote of thanks to all the speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Saumen, for leading that wonderfully insightful conversation. And on behalf of TiE Hyderabad and the TiE Sustainability Summit team, I would like to thank Dr. Anand, Sri Kiran, and Dr. Mahesh for taking the time out to share your views. And as Dr. Saumen pointed out, you covered a wide range of topics, whether it is in terms of the new innovative ways of clinical research, not using animals, and as simple a thing as documenting, helping build sustainable practices. Who could have ever thought about that? It was a very insightful discussion, and it has really shown us as to how we can all contribute in our own way, and with a little help from the government, how we can really scale it up, particularly considering the fact that we rank really low on the global sustainability index, how all of us can put our hands together and really scale the sustainability processes, particularly in the pharma, biotech, and healthcare industry. Thank you all, and thanks to the audience for your wonderful questions and participating and making this a very participative session. Thank you all.